You
Uh,
mentioned before we started filming that your sister is in charge of the
mm,
beautiful illustrations. And I think I remember you saying, isn't it a stamp?
a stamp. Oh, yes. Well, I mean, we have. So John Kay is a caricaturist who lived in Edinburgh in the 18th century. And the shop takes his name, and so does the press. My sister Elle is a lino cut artist. So it's not quite the technique that John Kay was using. He drew on engravings, copperplate engravings, but it's a similar sort of methodology in that you're cutting away the negative of an image and then making prints, like you say. So it's keeping the kind of print tradition
Yeah.
alive. But yeah, my sister Elle, she's enormously talented and she does all of the covers. She's been making artwork for my podcast for years. So yeah, she's been drawing little caricatures of writers like Shakespeare and Plath and anyone I've talked about, which is great, as well as my logo. And then she's done these covers as well. So yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, in
no, there.
fact, sorry, I should have got this earlier. This is the press logo. This is also a lino cut. Let me just line that up with the camera and not the light. So that is John Kay. That's a version of an adaptation of his self portrait with him, his cat that he claimed was the biggest cat in Edinburgh, or that's the tradition that's got attached to his cat, and a bust of Homer. So obviously a grand-minded man, which
Yeah, I
is
love
always to
that.
be admired.
And so clever, like you say, you'd be cutting away the negative, so you really have to get that sense of depth and how you want it to come out on this on the
Mm.
print. Yeah, no, they're just stunning. And they are sold at the John Kay bookshop. Are you distributing wider?
We are, depending on when this goes out, we might be. That is the plan, and it will be happening at some point this year. So we're kind of expanding it at the moment, but up until now, it's only been in the shop. But it's exciting to see how well it's going to do elsewhere.
And so you mentioned very early on in the podcast that there are a few real life figures that Stevenson was inspired by, and you mentioned it a few times in your introductory essay. What was your favorite dual real life person and why?
Well, you're right. I mean, there is a sort of, I suppose, a canonical one, which is Deacon Brodie. That is the figure who everyone says is the inspiration for Jekyll and Hyde, and he's sort of become the the canon original. In fact, there's a book, really fun book called The Fabulous Originals by Irving Wallace, and it's just a book of characters and the person who inspired them. So it's kind of like little dual biographies of the book and then the real person. And Deacon Brodie is always the person. And there's a lot of Edinburgh tourism that revolves around Deacon Brodie, and no doubt Deacon Brodie can be traced throughout Jekyll and Hyde. And there's all kinds of interesting little details, like Stevenson having a Brodie cabinet in his room as a child that was facing him, and he was told all these stories by his nanny about how Brodie would creep around Edinburgh and commit burglaries and stuff. And then there's a popular portrait of it, Stevenson just being left in that room and looking at the cabinet that this infamous criminal had made. And there it is in the room with him. But no, my favorite is the one that I mentioned in the essay that I got really into was Madeline Smith or Madeline Smith, who was a young woman socialite, very well off in Glasgow actually, but she caused an enormous scandal, and there ended up being the Victorian trial of the century, it's sometimes called, that took place in Edinburgh while Stevenson was a child. I think he was about 7 when this happened. And basically, Madeline Smith had engaged in a love affair with a much older man and a completely unsuitable match in the eyes of her parents because he was from a lower sort of social class. At some point, Madeline Smith wanted to break off the affair. This guy, who was called Pierre Angelier, decided he would threaten to expose all of these sort of graphic love letters that they'd exchanged, and allegedly she then murdered him, and did so by giving him arsenic-laced cocoa from her bedroom window, which he would come to every night. Every night they had a tryst or something. And so it's a morbid story, but I think the reason I like it so much in terms of Jekyll and Hyde is because it reflects that disproportionality we were talking about earlier, where Madeline Smith obviously felt that the potential exposure of these, well, let's say she's only alleged of murder and she did get away with it, so let's not, let's not condemn her here. If she did murder on Joliet, then it's potentially something of an overreaction. Or at least in our eyes, it looks like a bit of an overreaction to, these love letters are going to come out, so I'll kill you. Um, of course, in the culture of that day, very much the same environment that Stevenson grew up in, as Chesterton said of that culture, that it saw no difference between the worst and the moderately bad, and that's a key dynamic for Jekyll. There's absolutely no sense of proportionality about having those vices we talked about earlier, and likewise with Madeline Smith, it just seems like okay, well, I'll have to resort to murder then, if that's going to happen. So I think that was my favorite. And there's also a little bit of there's a nice sort of visual rhyme with the image of Angelier going to the window round the corner of the house away from the parents' room, which is quite reminiscent of Hyde sneaking into Jekyll's through the old dissecting rooms and all of that. So yeah, I kind of liked that one. Yeah, and there's a good book actually about the trial called The Strange Affair of Madeline Smith, which is by Douglas McGowan. So if anyone's interested and wants to read more about the case, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah,
Mm.
and it's definitely like you say, it's that idea where it's like if everything in your eyes is wrong on the same level, then we don't have the ability to have nuance and shades of gray and um it just leads to very terrible things. And if your reputation is more important than the life of another, we're going to get into some trouble because
Mm.
reputation can be easily smeared by someone who's not even telling the truth. So you're really just hoping somehow everyone likes you while you're also dealing with the fact that you are yourself a complex human being. And you might just slip arsenic in your cocoa. Who knows? Like,
Mm.
that's just a wild. Yeah, that's very cool. And I just want to take a moment. If anyone doesn't know Deacon Brodie, because living in Edinburgh, you just become very aware of all of the local heroes or not villains. I wouldn't say he was a full villain, but Deacon Brodie, his duality is that he was a cabinet maker by day, and then he would go into the same houses he built cabinets for and rob from the cabinets. Obviously, he had all the keys, and he was quite gentlemanly about it. What's that famous? He got caught once, and what did he say or what did he do? Do you remember?
Uh, yeah, he interestingly, Stevenson wrote a play about him and has him commit murder. But it's a bit the reason he's a bit more of a folk hero than a villain is that he never committed murder and would wish anyone who surprised him mid burgle good night and then scarper. So that was kind of part of his again a complete overreaction. He's hanged as legend has it on his own gallows that he had designed. But I'm not sure if there's any truth in that.
Yeah.
Um, but yes, sorry, I should have explained Deacon Brodie. I just described him like a local. Apparently, he would take putty and press the keys into it, and then make these replica keys and then go back and let himself in. That's the bit that seems so Jekyll and Hyde. He's like he's in the house, He
Hmm.
doesn't kick down the door or anything. He just sort of lets himself in.
Yeah, and wanders through.
Um,
Yeah, I love that. Good night while I've
mm.
taken your jewels.
Good night. Yeah.
And given your knowledge of R.L. Stevenson, Edinburgh, all of these local folk heroes, and the stories that R.L. Stevenson wrote within Edinburgh, what is the fact that you geek out over?
Oh, well, it's not directly connected to Edinburgh, but one of my favorite Jekyll and Hyde sort of factoids or bits of trivia. It goes back to the Jack the Ripper stuff we were talking about. So the book comes out in 1886. The Whitechapel murders begin in 1888. So you can see why things start to
Hmm.
kind of blend together a bit. It's very close. It's another London London untraceable criminal. But there was also, because Jekyll and Hyde was popular, there were stage adaptations pretty quickly. And in the early years of the Whitechapel murders, there was an actor called Richard Mansfield who took the part of Jekyll slash Hyde in a stage adaptation. And he was so good as and so compelling and terrifying that he was reported to the police as being, a likely suspect for the Jack the Ripper, because no one who was capable of that much evil on stage would, he must be capable of doing it for real. Basically, was the nature of the complaint, which is, depending on how you look at it, either slander or pretty much the best review an actor could ever get.
Yes, I would tend to lean towards the best review because
Yeah.
that means you're not only selling this fictional character, but you're making people believe you have the capacity to be a real life villain. That's very cool. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. And then you mentioned too, John K. Press has a few titles in the pipelines. Are we able to
Yes.
know what you're going to be producing next?
Yes, so these are coming up as quickly as possible. In fact, they're at the printers as we speak. We have Macbeth, another slightly tangentially Edinburgh related text, but I wanted to do a Shakespeare play, and obviously it's the Scottish play, and there are all sorts of interesting Edinburgh connections there. So I've written a disgustingly long essay outlining those. But other than that, it will be the full play. And my sister's illustration for that one is amazing. It's Edinburgh Castle. And you said at the beginning how there's a tendency for Jekyll and Hyde books to have a disgusting picture of Hyde on the front. Oh, I think we talked about that at the time. It's like, not only is that crap, but it also completely works against the novel, because
Yeah.
the way Hyde is described, it's left like, what is it? Like you said, it's like you see a deformity of the soul. It's not deformity of certain features necessarily. And obviously, infamously, film adaptations do things like make him much bigger and kind of gorilla-like, which is completely against what's in the book, or he turns into a bit of a, Incredible Hulk or whatever.
Yeah, and usually
Or
green
just,
and hairy is quite common.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like he's not a werewolf.
Mhm.
Um, but so we wanted to keep him as a figure in the distance. And similarly for Macbeth, we were like, no daggers and no sort of pools of blood, because that's, nothing wrong with either, but they are like, if you look up editions of Macbeth, just start clicking through until you hit one that doesn't have
Mm.
one of those two things. Um, so yeah,
Bonus
ours
points
is
if it's a dagger with a pool of blood.
oh, most of them are. Most of them are. Um, so yeah, that one is Edinburgh Castle. So the idea is to try and find locations around Edinburgh that fit the matter of whatever text we're doing. And then the other book that's also coming out is Edinburgh Ghost Stories. So it's a kind of anthology of ghost stories about Edinburgh. Stevenson again is in there with his short story that's not that short actually. The Body Snatcher. It's almost a novella. So it's a chunkier book. We've got this Walter Scott in there, Margaret Oliphant, Robert Ferguson, the poet. I've put his poet. He has a poem. There's a dialogue between two ghosts in Greyfriars Kirkyard. I've put that in there. And then there's a couple of other little short bits just telling. I keep saying sort of real ghost stories. I suppose that depends on what you believe, but stories that are well attested traditions in Edinburgh, to try and give people a sense of different stories you can find around the city. So yeah, that's book three, and we do have plans for going beyond that, but they're a little bit more vague at the moment. So I'll
Mhm.
leave it at that for now.
Yeah, they're shrouded in the fog that is ever present in the strange case
Yes,
of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
yes,
That sounds
very nice.
fantastic. Well, especially Edinburgh is so like full of really compelling, really interesting stories that all seem to happen below ground or like below the
Mm.
surface or under cover of dark. Like I'd be hard pressed to think of a bright sunny day story that happens there. Maybe who was
Well,
the woman who she got hung, was pronounced dead, and then came back to life, and so was
half hang
fearful.
it, Maggie.
Yes, yeah, that might have happened during the day, but
Yeah. So that was actually a bit of a an issue with the ghost stories. Like, does that count as a ghost story? I guess not. She lived. You
I
can't
mean,
have a
she
ghost
does have
story
a
where
death certificate, though. That was the
she
whole,
does.
yeah, there you
True.
go.
It's a sort of living death. It's a zombie story, really. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Huh.
Maybe that'll be book 4, Edinburgh zombies.
The Zombies of Edinburgh.
Yeah.